Tutorial by Learn Fast Studios.
Let us learn more about these functions by using one more example. To write a C program to calculate the kinetic energy by reading the values m mass, v velocity. Kinetic energy is calculated using the formula 0.5 into m into v, which is nothing but half mv square. Let us write this program in 4 versions. First version without function, second version functions with no arguments and no return values, third version functions with arguments but no return values, fourth version functions with arguments and return values. Let's get started. Since we need to read the values of the mass and then velocity to calculate the kinetic energy, we are declaring 3 variables. Both are in floating type. Now the next step is to read the input values. So by using these steps, first we will read the value of the mass. Since the mass is a floating type, we use the format specifier %f. Similarly, we also read the value for the velocity. Since velocity is also of the type floating point, we use the format specifier %f. Now we need to write down the formula for calculation of the Ke, which is our kinetic energy. So the kinetic energy calculation formula is given by half multiplied by m multiplied by v multiplied by v, which is nothing but half mv square in short. You can also use mathematical header file to calculate the square of the value. After this statement, the kinetic energy is calculated and stored in Ke variable. Now we need to show it in the output. Let us write output statement. So this statement will display the kinetic energy on our output screen. Since our Ke is a floating point number, we use the format specifier %f. Now let us keep our description in the comment section and then try to execute this code. It is asking me to enter the input values. I need to enter both the mass value as well as a velocity value for this program. I am entering 100 and 50. Now the kinetic energy is calculated and it is displayed on the screen. So in this program, we use m and then v as an input, calculated the kinetic energy and displayed that output. This is a normal program. Now let us do the second version, which is functions with no arguments and no return values. Let us save this program as functions with no arguments, no return values, and let us do the modifications. So these are the set of the instructions that we need to perform in order to calculate the kinetic energy. Without making any change, I am simply copying all the steps, pasting it in one more block. I am giving the name for this block of the statement Ke calculation. Since we already know a function is a self-contained block of the statement denoted by the name, in order to differentiate between the normal variable and then function, we need to use parentheses. Every function definition will be having a return type. Since this version we are not passing any argument as well as we are not returning any value, I am declaring the return type as void. My function definition is over. Now this block of the statement, which are written to calculate the kinetic energy, is named with the Ke cal. In order to use this function in your program, the next step that we need to do is to write the function declaration. If you don't want to write the function declaration, just copy all this code and paste it over the main function. That's all. Otherwise, it is always preferred to write the function declaration for any function. Let us write down the function declaration part. The function declaration is having the syntax, the return type, space, the function name, and then argument list type. Since our kecal function is not returning any value, we will write down the return type as void and the function name kecal. Since it is not taking any argument, I am writing down void. You may also skip writing down this void. Even though you don't write void, it does mean that we are not passing any value. Now the function declaration is over. The compiler is now familiar after this statement execution that in future you will encounter a function kecal which does not accept any argument as well as which is not returning any value. Writing this function definition and then function call is not enough to execute the statements that you wrote in this kecal. If you want to execute the statements that you wrote in this kecal, then you need to write down explicitly a statement called as a function call. So I am writing down the function call. The function call syntax for no arguments, no return type functions is given as function name and then empty parenthesis, since we are not passing any arguments. Here the function name is kecal and then we are not passing any value as an argument. I simply use the empty parenthesis. That's all. Even though you have many functions in your program, the program execution will always start with the opening bracket of the main function. Once it encounters this function call statement, then the control will be transferred from the calling function to called function, which is our kecal, and then it executes all the statements that you wrote in this block. After execution of all the statements, then it will return back to the next line of the function where we call this. Since there are no other statements in our main function, it will terminate the code. Let us execute this code and check whether we are getting the expected output or not. As simple as that. Let us give the input 100 and then 50. We got the same output. Hence we finished the second version also. Now let us write down the third version, which is function with arguments and no return value. So I am saving this file as N.A.N.R. in brief, arguments and no return value. So this is our previous code where we wrote for no arguments and no return type version. Now in order to convert these arguments and return values, let us learn what does this argument means. I already told you this statement is said to be as a function call. A function which has this function call is said to be as a calling function. The function which will be invoked when the function call occurs is said to be as a called function. Since kecal calling statement is written in the main function, the main is said to be as a calling function and then kecal is said to be as a called function. Why do we require arguments? Suppose we read the values of mass and velocity in main function. Now we want to transfer this mass and then velocity value which we read in the main function to kecal function. Then we need to use arguments. So let us change this code. Since we have to write down the code for reading the mass and velocity, I am simply using the same code from this kecal and here I am pasting it. Now what I can do, I need to declare the values m and v, since we are using this m and v. So m and v both are float values, float m comma v. Now we need not to make use of this m comma v here. After this, the status of the main function is it will ask the user to input the mass value and then velocity value, store it in m and v. Now what we need to do is, we need to pass the m value as well as an v value to our function as an argument. If you want to write down any argument, then we need to do certain modification in the function declaration, definition, and then function call. So in the function definition, let us do the modification first. We need to mention the formal parameters. Since we are expecting to pass the two values, we need to declare two variables here. We are expecting two values are to be float values, so that is why I am taking the variables float mass, comma, float velocity. So whatever the values that are passed to this called function will now get stored in this mass as well as in velocity. Since we are getting the values from other function, we need not to read it again. I am removing this step and we need to perform the processing. Since our values of the mass are stored in the mass variable, I am changing this variable name as mass. And then since our velocity is stored in VEL variable, I am changing the V as VEL. Here also VEL. Since we are using the KE, we need to declare this KE. You can also change this variable. Even though you don't change, that doesn't matter. Now processing is done. Since we don't want to pass any value back, we will display the output here itself. We finished writing function definition. Now let us go and then change. Now let us go and do the changes in the function declaration. In our previous case, we are not passing any of the arguments. But in this case, we want to pass two of the arguments, both mass as well as in velocity. Since the mass and then velocity data types are float itself, I need to mention two arguments, float, comma, float. Here in the function declaration, you should always use the data type of the argument list that we want to pass. Since our mass and then velocity are floating type, we are mentioning float and then float. Now let us do the changes in the function declaration. The function declaration is now changed as KE call within the parenthesis actual parameters. The actual parameters are the values which we want to transfer that to our call function. Now the main function is having the values m and then v, and we want to pass this m and v to KE cal. So we need to pass the actual parameters m, comma, v. This m contains the mass value that is given from the user, and then v is having the velocity value that is given from the user. Now let me tell you how these values are passed to the KE call. I will explain you how the values are passed from the calling function to called function. The parameters that you declare in the called function definition is said to be as an formal parameter. The parameters that you mention in the function call m, v are said to be as an actual parameter. It is already said that the formal parameters during the function call will be initialized with the actual parameters. The value m will get stored in the mass. The value v will get stored in the velocity. That is how the value actual parameters will now transfer to the formal parameters that we write in the function definition. Then the calculation will follow and kinetic energy is calculated and the result will be displayed. Let us see the output for this code. Let us give the same input 100 and then 50. Let me explain you what is happening here. The first 100 and then 50 is now get stored in m and v respectively. After that, the values m and then v will be now transferred to this KE cal function. The mass is assigned with m value which is 100, velocity is assigned with a v value 50, ke is calculated as 0.5 into the mass value 100 into velocity value 50 into 50. So that is how the value 1,25,000 arrived. So that is it. Now we have completed the version 3. Let us now see the functions with both the arguments as well as a return type, which is our 4th version. Let us save this program, AR in short. In this program, our KECal function should return the value. We already seen how this KECal function is taking the arguments in our previous program. Now this KECal function has to return the value. For returning any value, we need to remember a statement called as a return statement. So the return statement will return the value from called function back to the calling function. I already told you the main function is a calling function. KECal function is a called function. Since till now we didn't pass any of the values back to the calling function, we mentioned the return type as void, and then even in the declaration we mentioned it as in void. Now let us change the scenario. The value calculated kinetic energy is stored in the variable ke. Now instead of printing here, let us remove this output statement and then return the value into main function. In order to return any value to the main function, we use the return statement. So within the return, we need to mention what is the value that we want to pass. I am again reminding you that at most one variable only you can pass back. So that is why we are having only one return type. But whereas in arguments you can have any number. So that is why you may have the multiple arguments here. If you want, you can also pass back the multiple arguments, but not in the variable format, but using the pointers. That topic we can discuss it later. Now, since we are passing the ke value back to the calling function, we need to mention the return type here. Since the ke is declared as a floating point, we need to change this void as an float type. Our function definition is over. Now we need to make the changes in the function declaration also. Here we need to do the change the return type as float. Now when you call this function, it will calculate the ke value and then it will return back to the main function. If you don't store the value which is written from this KECal, then there is no meaning of using this return statement. So you can store this value by using a temporary variable declaration. I am declaring one more temporary variable, float kinetic energy. Now I want to store the value that is returned from this KECal into the variable kinetic energy. So kinetic energy equal to KECal, and I already told you what is the syntax for writing down the functions with arguments. We need to pass the value both m and then v for this KECal function. Once this statement gets executed, the control will be transferred from main function to our subfunction KECal, and the m will be initialized to mass, v will be stored in this val, and then ke will be calculated by using this formula half mv square, and then this function will return the value ke, and this ke value now gets stored in the kinetic energy, which is the variable that we declare in the main function. Now in order to see the output, we need to use the print statement. So the print statement kinetic energy, as simple as that. So we have done the 3 modifications. We changed the function definition, we use the return type, the float, and then we made one more change. We use the return statement to return the value in the function definition. Coming to the function declaration, the return type previously it was void, now it was changed to float. Since we are expecting float value from KECal, we need to store the same value, floating value, in temporary storage space. So that is why I declared a variable float kinetic energy and storing the value that is obtained from the KECal in kinetic energy. Now after this, I am just printing the value kinetic energy. Let us now check whether our program is executing properly or not. Let us give again the same input 100 and then 50, which is resulting in 1,25,000. So that is our output. So we have seen 4 versions for the same program of calculating the kinetic energy by reading the value mass velocity. That's all for this session, guys. If you are able to write code for these programs, you can paste your code in the comment section. Otherwise, you can also post your code in the blog address shared in this video description. Have a good day. It's an assignment time, guys. In this assignment, we are having 3 problems. The first problem is to write a C program to calculate the area of the rectangle by reading the inputs length and breadth. The area is calculated as length multiplied by breadth. And now you need to write down the 4 programs for this. First program is without functions, functions with no arguments and return values, and then functions with arguments and no return values, and then functions with arguments and return values. This is the first program that you need to write. The second program is to write a C program to calculate the sum of the first n natural numbers by reading the input n. The sum is calculated using the formula n into n plus 1 by 2. Where the n is a number. You need to write down the 4 programs for this. Without functions, functions with no arguments, no return values, functions with arguments, no return values, and functions with arguments and return values. The third program is to write a C program to calculate the distance traveled by a vehicle by taking the inputs u, a, t, where u is the initial velocity, a is the acceleration, t is the time interval. S is calculated as the formula u into t plus half a into t, which is ut plus half at square. You need to write down 4 more programs for this. First one is to without functions, functions with no arguments, no return values, functions with arguments, no return values, functions with arguments and return values. That's all, guys.